What's up, guys? It's Kyle. You're watching the EXP Expo Day 2. The day I'm going to call the day 12-year-old Kyle's dreams come true because he gets to talk to everybody he's loved for 20-plus years. We're going to bring on now the man, the myth, the legend, John Romita Jr. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Kyle, what's going on? How you been?
Very good, very good. How about yourself?
All right, not bad. I was caught in traffic. I just literally sat down 3 minutes beforehand, but the worst drivers in the world, and they were all in front of me this morning.
I know that feeling. I came from church this morning to be here, and it's only about 2 miles, and it took me twice the normal time.
I would not have made it to church. They wouldn't have allowed me after the cursing I did as I was driving. So don't even ask.
It's true. It's true. So I've been asking everybody who comes on, and you get this question a million times. Why did you choose to be in comics? But I think for you, it's probably a pretty unique answer.
I can't sing and dance. That's why I'm in comics.
That's the answer.
I can actually dance. I just can't sing. So we're even. The argument is that I did it because my father was in it, and that's true and false at the same time. I watched it as a kid, and it gave me a direction, and yet it worked against me because he was so difficult. Not difficult. He was so hard on me, anticipating that I was thinking I was going to get in because of him, and he made sure that wasn't the case. So it worked both ends of it, but it did give me a direction because I watched him as an artist, and then it directed me towards the art field. And he wanted me to take fine art lessons, and I kind of combined it with an advertising illustration education. And before I finished my 4 years, there was an opportunity to work at Marvel, and it just kind of exploded from there.
It's an interesting thing because you talk to a lot of people in the industry who don't have parents who are in the arts, but you did. And did that, and having that influence, did that free you up, or do you feel like that kind of pushed you that way?
No pushing involved. The only pushing was self-imposed. It gave me a direction to the art field, not specifically the cartooning field.
Sure.
I was fully intending on being an illustrator, an artist, and the chance to work at Marvel in between my second and third year of college happened in the summertime, so to speak, in the off season. And I took it to just almost to be self-imposed intern and thinking this would be a great experience. But I was in an advertising curriculum, and I was planning on putting a suit on and walking up and down Madison Avenue with a portfolio looking for work, because my father was telling me, I just don't want you in this. Get into fine arts, get into advertising, don't do this. He struggled with it as far as I guess amount of work, schedules, deadlines. He hated it. He struggled with it all of his career and thought that I was going to do the same thing. And to a certain extent, he's right about everybody in the business. Everybody struggles with it, unless you're Jack Kirby.
It's true. And it's interesting that you say you were thinking about advertising. I was just talking to Mark Bagley about it, and I talked to Neil Adams about it before. Advertising seems to lend itself to comic art. People who choose this field also seem drawn to advertising.
That is a commonality, but I don't think it does, literally. I think the only thing about it is possibly the illustration avenue of it and the creativity avenue of it, but that applies to a lot of other fields in art, under the art ages. But the advertising thing does, interestingly enough, approach a commonality in a lot of, because when I was younger, several of the guys that my father's peers were also advertising people. So you are correct.
So I'm fighting the question I want to ask because I'm trying to be professional. Because I just want to ask you to tell me everything about Spider-Man.
Tell you everything about Spider-Man.
But I don't want to be that guy. Just the first Spider-Man book I bought with my own money had your covers on it, had your work on it.
Okay.
So it's one of those, is that this is 12-year-old Kyle kind of losing his mind. But I want to talk, instead of going there, about some of the stuff you've done not at Marvel or DC. Some of
Okay.
the stuff at Image and at Icon is or was, but the Hit Girl and Kick-Ass stuff.
Right. Right.
That has introduced a whole new generation to your art. And you got to work with Mark on that. What was that collaboration like on something that was so unique and such a different take on that kind of story?
It started because we worked together on the Wolverine series, and that was just the two of us getting together and enjoying working with each other. The uniqueness of Kick-Ass started with Mark, in all fairness to everyone, but it I guess it perpetuated itself because of the two of us working on it. So his idea was of a certain basis, and then we started working together, and then things started to develop once we began the collaboration. Uh, Mark should get all the credit in the world for it, and I'll take a little bit just underneath that. But we had so much fun doing it together. It happened, it produced itself because we were having so much fun together.
So when you take on something that's ultra violent, like Kick-Ass is, like Hit Girl is, how do you approach that as an artist?
That's a great question, and it's a natural question in this for storytelling's sake. The visuals, there's an interesting anecdote after that, but the part I struggled with at first, or at least was intimidated by, was how I was going to apply the storytelling, which I was told was my strong point, in this storytelling to this ultra violent and adult material. And I was wondering the same question. I even asked my wife, how am I going to do this? She said, just let it play out the way you would have done it normally. So my wife, Kathy, actually should take credit for this. But it applied to this perfectly. All I did was take my normal storytelling process and add this ultra-violent stuff to it. I was a little bit nervous and intimidated because I had come into the field when everybody was considered to be young fans, so to speak. 13, 12, 11, 10-year-old people. And I was concerned that this kind of thing was going to put those people off, and their parents would be so pissed off that they would never allow me to work in the business again. Fortunately, at that time, Creator Owned was applying to a little bit more mature reader and the R-rated section of the business. But it took me a little time to get used to it. Once I started working on it, then I had to find ways to eviscerate, to slaughter people. I would get to bed at night and ask my wife, all right, I just cut somebody in half. What do I do next? And she would give me that strange look. Don't ask that question before you get to bed. You're going to have strange nightmares. And yet, at some point, Kathy and I would be discussing ways to disembowel people with a smile and a wink and a nudge and a sparkle in our eyes. We were talking about slaughtering people. And I'll never forget this conversation. This is the anecdote. I held back the decapitation of a character because I thought there is nothing beyond that is spectacular to that extent. I said, I can't do. I told Mark this. I can't use that yet. That's when I had a character slightly decapitated. The top of his head was put off. It was a bald guy with a tattoo on his head, because I wanted it to be the ultimate in death. And that scene didn't apply to this. And it applied to Mother Russia. As a matter of fact, later on, Hit Girl decapitates Mother Russia because of what she had done to her. And I said, this is perfect. This is the end game. You can't get it. And my wife and I were discussing this. She says, you're right. You can't use that unless it's the end game. And this was with Mother Russia. This was the end game. So these are the discussions two adult, mature, and relatively intelligent people are having before they fall asleep at night.
See, and that's the stuff people don't think about when it comes to making comics, right? Is that you're bouncing ideas off of everybody, and
yes,
your wife is going, well, what if you did this?
Yes. Yes. And interestingly enough, and I'm sure the artists are the same way. You tend to plaster reference or influence or anything that inspired you. You plaster it per job all over. I have a gigantic drafting table, and I fill it with images that will help me while I'm working on a certain project. I did it. Unfortunately, I had to do it with the 9/11 Spider-Man issue. I had to update it every day. But with this, I had to have images of, I hate to say of bloody fights, but there were instances where I had to show, for instance, when an eye pops out of a head, when somebody gets plastered from the back of the head, an eye pops out, what does it look like? I had to go look it up. That's
Right.
sickening. And then I was getting pop-ups. I was getting pop-ups of this kind of garbage. When somebody slices their abdomen open, what do the innards look like when they come? So exactly the kind of conversation. You need reference on it. It's sickening.
It doesn't look like Roger Rabbit, I'll tell you that.
I know, here I am smiling and laughing about it, but
yeah, it's, well, in hindsight is a thing.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the Dark Days stuff that you did at DC.
Okay.
I was in the panel at C2E2 in Chicago when they announced.
You say did. Do you know something I don't know?
I want to talk about the very first.
Yes, kidding.
That when that announcement came and that the beginnings of this whole universe that has just spawned into so much amazing content that you're still doing. I'm not, and as far as I'm concerned, we'll do until the end of time. But I mean, your run on Action Comics recently has been one of my favorite runs.
Thank you.
So, but I want to talk about that as it was going back to the way it was put to us, and I can still hear Dan's voice in my head. That it was going back to the way that Stan and Jack worked, where it was the plot and then the art told the story and the writer figured it out, and that it was you and Andy Kubert and Jim Lee and Greg Capullo. And they showed us that image and they gave us that ash can that you had all signed, and just weeping because it was so cool. What is it like to collaborate with those guys, those four artists?
Collaborate? I have never collaborated with them that they knowingly collaborated back. I watched their stuff. The guys that you mentioned are my contemporaries. And without them, it's hard to compare it to sports. But if you're an athlete and you are competing with the Joneses, so to speak, it raises your abilities because you have to stay up with them. If those guys weren't as good as they were, and I had it in my head that I'm better than them, I would never get better. Never. Unfortunately, one of the other great things about being a Romita is having a father who knows you will not improve unless you think you need to improve, so to speak. So working with those guys is, working alongside them, so to speak, is wonderful inspiration. I think the guys you mentioned are the best in the business, and they inspire me and they make me better. But working with writers who allow me to play, so to speak, but still have their influence added. In other words, their dialogue. When I work with writers, I don't tell them, listen, I'll take a plot or nothing else. I don't do that. I don't want to truncate or stunt their creativity. But what I do ask them to do is allow me to tell the story and then discuss it with them should I alter from what they've offered. It worked with Neil Gaiman. It worked with all of the guys I've worked with in the past, Mark and Jeff Johns and Brian. Because I tell them, I love what you got here. This is what I want to do with it. And I let them know. And if they say, no, you can't do that because I need this editorially, so be it. But what I'll do is let them know that something's coming not quite of what they asked for or what they were implying. And then they get it, and they will change the dialogue, so be it. But I won't ever take anything out. I will alter something or add.
So I guess I said collaborating, and I that was the wrong word, but you guys brought this new era to DC, the dark metal, the dark days,
Sure.
Did you guys speak about the way things were going to look? Did you guys play off each other, or was it literally just trying to one up each other?
I'd say the latter, without any malice. Without any malice.
Hey, that's
when you have guys like that you are peers of, you have to raise your level. So it is competing, but there's no malice involved. I look at their stuff. I keep, as I said before, keeping things around me for influence. Their stuff is right next to my table because I want to see what it is they're doing that is so wonderful and what is so revered. It's keeping up with the Joneses. There's no other way of putting it. However, the discussions did not get beyond, wow, what do you think about this? And it was quick because everybody has their own. And you can't really use somebody else's opinions without affecting your own. And I don't want to do that, and they don't want to do that. Everybody is an entity unto themselves.
so. One of the other things that I wanted to ask about is that in your time, you've only been working with DC for 5 years now.
I think it's 6 years. Yep.
5-6 years. But you've got to work on every major character and introduce a character that was really cool, the Silencer. So what's it like taking, you worked on every tent pole at Marvel. Now you've worked on every tent pole at DC. What's it like getting to play with the guys that our industry is built on?
It's not as much that, although that is part of the conversation that you have after having a glass of wine or a beer. I got a chance to work on the top, although I haven't done Wonder Woman monthly. However, it's more working with the writers who have the idea to work on these particular tentpoles. And then after the fact, you say, man, I got a chance to work on Batman. I got a chance to work on Superman. I got a chance to work on Batman with Frank. I got a chance to work on Superman with brilliant writers, Brian and Jeff Johns. That is to the part that I will sit at a bar and tell a bartender that doesn't know who I am, I got a chance to work with this guy. And it would be the same thing with Wonder Woman when Stephanie Phillips and I get a chance. I hope that that's the case as long as I can work in this business. I heard Mark Bagley, as I was listening in the last couple of minutes, saying he's looking for semi-retirement. I would be the most boring mofo in the world if I retired.
It's true.
And I don't want to be a crossing guard or a bus driver. I am an artist, and I'll do that unless I can't. So as long as I'm doing this and I'm reasonably good at it, I want to be able to do this in this manner to work on these characters, if not creating my own. And then there's a whole bunch of other things I have coming that I can't talk about. I'd have to send a car bomb to you if I did tell you. And I'm Sicilian, so I'm really good at it.
Well, we don't want the car bomb. Believe me, I understand. No, so that was it's funny. My dad retired at the beginning of the pandemic, and I've been watching him have nothing to do, and I'm never doing that. As long as I can keep making something and keep supporting comic books, I'm going to do it until they roll me out with a sheet over me.
A buddy of mine, two of my buddies that I grew up with, just retired from their. One was from civil service jobs, and another one owned a business, and he sold it. And I didn't ask him, what are you going to do? He voluntarily told me, and I'll still be consulting. So he's not quitting. He sold the business to make that huge chunk of money, but he's still going to be working because we have it in us. Guys our age were raised by Depression era parents who lived and breathed work. And we had a great work ethic passed on to us. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm an artist and a husband and a father. After that, I'm a son, relatively good son, but for two wonderful people. After that, I'm not good at anything else. I can dance, but I can't sing.
So let me ask you about that work ethic and that work day. What does your work day look like? Are you I get up in the morning, I sit at my table, have a cup of coffee and work? Or is it?
I get up in the morning, work out, come back, shower, have a cup of coffee, and then work. And I work until I get a certain amount done. Or I work until my wife throws something into the doorway saying, "All right, stupid, you got to come into the bedroom and be a husband. You haven't done that for 48 hours," that kind of thing. It more or less happens as I feel. I work more days a week than I used to, but I don't do as many through the nights. I'll just work 15 hours a day. Whereas when I was younger, I was working 5 days a week, but I would go without sleep twice. Well, now I just work all 7 days. I just work a couple of hours less, and it seems to work a little better that way.
I hear that. It's it's interesting is that my grandparents are you're of the same generation as my parents, and my grandparents are the same generation as your parents, and I've kind of got that installation too, that it's get up in the morning and do your work and just work and work, and that 7-day-a-week thing. And it's really interesting to listen to creatives, and I'm not nearly at the level of many of the people I'm interviewing, but it's interesting that to learn to hear that kind of, hey, think about it like a job, think about it like this is how you do it. And it really is inspiring to somebody like me to hear that that you're still churning it out 7 days a week, but you figured out how to do it without running yourself into the ground.
That's very true. And as far as running it into the ground, remember, we're not digging ditches and we're not lifting girders.
It's true.
We lift a pencil. And well, that's one of the reasons why I exercise, is because it's very easy to get out of shape by sitting at a desk 15 hours a day for 6 and 7 days a week. So keep yourself healthy. It's not like, and there's vanity plays into it. Vanity is a good thing in this case. But I enjoy this so much still. 43 years. January 4th was 43 years. And, I started when I was 2 years old. So look, it's amazing that I'm only, never mind. That's a joke.
So let's kind of run down the list of the things at Marvel, because there are so many. I mean, I'm looking at the list here in front of me, and I don't see many characters that you didn't have a chance to play with.
I want to play. Excuse me. I don't want to say I want to play with. One of the characters that I regretted not playing with was Doctor Strange. And if it ever happens that in the next 35 or 40 years I get lucky again, I'll play with Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange, huh? That's an interesting pick. I mean, what about Doctor Strange draws you to that?
Honestly, looking at Ditko's Doctor Strange meant so much to me, because I didn't think as much about his artwork as I was the special effects, so to speak. It was so interesting. And then following the character through different art teams, I just always loved the character. And again, it's a prototypical Stan Lee character, a normal life, a doctor, a surgeon, and he becomes a superhero. But Dormammu and the afterlife, so to speak, the other life, just to me opened up so many creative avenues to me. I've always wanted to play with it, and I have a premise that I think would be perfect for it, that I'm applying to a couple of DC characters. At any rate, I've always thought that character was spectacular, always, and I would love to try it again. And I'm a freelancer, so I won't get in any trouble for saying that.
Hey, well, and I've been telling people, think about this like it's your vision board. Tell us this weekend who you want to work on, and we'll exercise all our resources to make it happen, minimal as they are.
All right, there it is. And I would love to draw it. I want to draw Dormammu at some point. Love that character.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. I have a Dormammu statue just right over there.
All right, cool.
So I know. We'll start with Dazzler.
God. Although I was in the car listening to disco. I got to tell you, I have a lot of oldies on my phone that goes back with all the blues music, and I have it mixed in. And every once in a while, I remember dancing to that stuff. However, go ahead. I exaggerate the clarity.
Hey, you're talking. I just bought the Bee Gees documentary that came out. HBO just released it. I bought the DVD.
All right.
I love music. There's nothing, there's nothing I don't like in the music industry. So, but I want to talk. That book had a very specific look. Had a very specific disco feel, but it was also psychedelic. It had
Sure,
some of that influence in it.
sure.
The backgrounds on the covers really stand out, but when you get inside, that same feel pulls through the whole book, I think.
The,
What is that process like? Did one inspire the other, or did it all just kind of come as one sort of vision?
in all humility, Stan Lee's format for having the real and the fantasy in a balance always plays its part. Again, this is a regular lady who becomes this character, so to speak. Uh, and the balance was, you can't have too much of the fantasy. You have to have just the right amount, because if you have too much, then you don't like it as much and you want the other, which is the reality. So I'll never forget the conversation Stan Lee had with my father, and I was listening in. If you balance that reality and that fantasy properly, and I don't mean even, look at Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Too much Peter Parker and you want to see Spider-Man. Too much Spider-Man, you want to see what happens with Peter Parker and Mary Jane. So my point is, that's the balance. And with the Dazzler, it was the same thing. It was a concerted effort to find that right balance. Tom DeFalco and I worked on it, and the visuals were a little bit of me and my experience in clubs, and also a little bit of the loving of that wild-looking dystopia. I can't say that drugs were involved because I never took drugs, but fantasy does get into your head as a creator, and you know that couple of dreams and you wake up and you write something down and it applies. The same thing with Doctor Strange as I'm playing. It's that dystopia, that insanity, that I keep a pad next to the bed just for that purpose. If I wake up with something great, I'll write it down. The next morning it makes no sense, but sometimes it does. So there was just that right amount of insane fantasy involved, but it was the balance. It's the balance that Stan Lee imbued in me while listening to him.
That's interesting to talk about that balance, because one of my favorite books that you've done is what we call a street level character in Daredevil. He's not a superhero per se. He's a regular dude with some special powers.
Well, that's then it applies to Punisher more so than Daredevil.
It's true.
No superpowers.
Punisher, yeah, I was gonna ask about Punisher Warzone as well, but the Daredevil run and the Punisher run, the grounded heroes.
That's correct.
How do you approach the storytelling with the art of them, as opposed to a Spider-Man who's constantly flying through the air, or a Superman, or with your DC work?
I think the one that's separated from that is the Superman, and yet Superman was constantly being brought down to the real world, because one of the great things that Stan did creating Spider-Man was a complete reaction to Superman. Superman was perfect. He created Spider-Man, the kid that was haunted by his own aunt, the Jewish kid. Oh, you poor dear, he gets a nose cold, he gets a head cold, he slips and falls, he makes a mistake, he screws up, but he's a superhero. The polar opposite to Superman. And yet, red and blue costume, works at a newspaper. The Green Goblin was the Joker. So that was Stan's reaction to, and here, interestingly enough, ironically, Kick-Ass was Mark Miller's and my version of further taking it away from superhero, a kid from the street that becomes a superhero with no powers. But with the street level characters, to me, the attraction is conversation I had with my father driving into Manhattan one day when we drove past Forest Hills, and my father pointed out in the distance, that's where Peter Parker lives. And I think my mouth dropped open. So, holy crap, that's right. We live in the same city as Peter Parker. And then he talked about Hell's Kitchen. That's where Daredevil lives. And then he talked about all the other characters that were in the New York area. But where does Superman live? Clark Kent lives in what? Metropolis? Right. That annoyed the crap out of me. But then he had to quantify it. Well, it's just another word for New York City. but it wasn't. We couldn't use the street names, that kind of thing. Oh, Gotham City. That's New York City. Why can't you call it New York City? Stan's reaction to Gotham and Metropolis was grounding it in New York. The attraction, and I know it's New York centric, and that the guy from Dakota that reads this or listens to this might be a little bit chased by this, but it turned those characters into a reality for me. And there's that balance of fantasy and reality. Daredevil, all of the New York characters, Daredevil, Spider-Man, and the Punisher. I not only used the Punisher in areas that I lived, I used some of my friends. As, for instance, a buddy of mine, I watched him get his brains beaten, and I got dragged into it too. And I'll never forget taking him to the hospital, and he had the swollen face. I used Punisher's image when he got his ass handed to him. I used that, my friend Tony Sirico. And I swear to God, another time when my friends, I'll use their names because it's in reverence, and Stephen Capuzzo, my dear friends, they're like brothers to me. I unfortunately was involved with watching them getting their asses handed to them. But the images of them, that is street level, ground level reality. Daredevil. And you notice I have all the characters. I get a chance to beat up all the characters. The writers asked me to do this because I've seen it, unfortunately. I have also been the victim to it, but that brings me down to that level of street, and I enjoy those characters that much more. Maybe that's why I enjoy the thought of doing Doctor Strange, because it's such a disparity.
Do you talk about going into Manhattan with your father, and you're a New York guy, you're a East Coast guy. Do you think the fact that you've literally gotten to play in the sandbox that you get to play in with these characters has influenced the way you present the characters?
Sure, and it applies to your question about the street level characters. Absolutely. The answer is just a wholehearted yes. Because when somebody says we're over on the rail yards on the west side of Manhattan, you go get reference. Oh man, the image. For instance, the stories about Frank Miller going up onto the roof of his building and taking pictures of water tanks. How many people started using water tanks after Frank did that? But then people taking photographs. I went out and used my camera and started taking photographs. The same thing. Now the internet, it's a push of a button. I get anything I need. My reference file is immense. Love every bit of it. But the imagery is palpable. It's right there in front of you, and everybody can access that imagery with the internet. And the characters I'm working on, Schmuggy and Bimbo, it's a create-our-own property with Howard Chaykin. The reference on the 70s New York City, when everything was ugly. I have a stack of reference that is beyond belief, and I was there. The wide lapels, the shoes. For instance, I wore those shoes because I'm a short guy. Loved everything about them. Couldn't help it. You can't run away from anybody in them, but you can stand tall.
And it's interesting. I asked Howard yesterday about his work on The Shadow, and how The Shadow, his New York in The Shadow, really does reflect New York pre it becoming Disneyland.
Film noir.
Yeah.
Goes back to the 40s, but you're right. The grimy part of New York City, which is why Howard suggested it for this project we're working on. It originally was based on two characters that grew up with my parents in the 40s. Howard said, let's make it a little bit more substantial to people that are alive, so to speak. And let's bring it into the 70s because we both grew up in the 70s.
Yeah, no, it's wild to me. I spent a very short time in New York living there, and it's seeing hey, I know that corner. There's a coffee shop right there. And then you see somebody from New York who's drawn it, and there's a coffee shop right there. It's very interesting. So you've had some pretty long runs on some books there at Marvel, and let's start with Iron Man, just because we haven't talked about him yet.
Okay.
You had a 4-year run on Iron Man.
A couple of runs.
Yeah, and then came back, a little bit later for sure. Iron Man has become this massive flagship, and you certainly had an influence on the way he looks now and the way we see him now. with your runs. So what's it like to see a character you worked on for so long and did so many issues of on the big screen and as toys and all of that kind of stuff?
If I had created the costume instead of remodeling it, then I would probably be extremely proud. The kick-ass thing was one of the things that I was proud of. And then seeing my name on the screen, that was exciting. But you have to ask guys like Stan and Jack Kirby and Gene Colan. I didn't create the costumes. I say we, meaning Bob and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on writer. He's going to shoot me. Help me out with the Iron Man writer that I worked with. Oh my God. I drank a glass of
Bob
wine.
was the name I had. Bob Layton was. Give me a second. I'll pull it up. I got it right here.
It'll come to me. I'm just blanking because I'm running out of gas.
No, I hear you.
Those guys, we remodeled the character, so to speak, but we did not create the imagery. Even Bob suggested the glistening off the costume. That was there, just not to the extent that we did it. But the only thing I can be proud of is working on the stories with those guys. The part about the alcoholism is brilliant. It really brought that character to earth, as opposed to being just a standard superhero.
Who's David Michelin?
Dave McLeany. I apologize, Dave. I'm so sorry. I forgot my own name yesterday. My middle initial. The point is to have it bring that character to the reality side. Again, here we go with that same reality thing. Balancing the reality with the fantasy. Tony Stark isn't just a billionaire, he's an imperfect billionaire. It's brilliant.
All right. So Daredevil, I know you were always partial to your Daredevil run.
I am.
Talk about that. Talk about what's it like to draw, a character in a neighborhood, and what's it like to take a character and do some of the storylines that you did with him.
The interesting part about Daredevil is the very first cover that I saw my father drawing was the Daredevil number 12 with Kazar in this tree. I'd seen him draw other things before. One was romance comics, and I had seen other covers he did, but it was after the fact. Middle of the night, there was a monster under my bed, and my brother was sleeping soundly. I got terrified. I didn't want to look under the bed, so I went upstairs into those Queens attics where you pull down the stairs and you unfold it and you crawl up into the attic. And my father was in that attic working some stupid hours. And he didn't get upset. He just scared away the monsters. And as a 7-year-old, I sat down and watched him draw Daredevil, ink Daredevil. He was inking it at the time, Daredevil number 12. And I started asking him questions, and he was patiently answering them. And when he told me that Daredevil is the guy in the middle, surrounded by all the bad guys, and the Plunderer was the bad guy, dressed like a pirate. And I said, what do you mean? What are they're going to beat him up. They want to try and kill him. Oh, I said, oh my God. And he said, but he's going to beat them all up. Wow, I said. And then he went on to explain, oh, by the way, Daredevil is blind. And apparently my mouth dropped open and I sat down and started drawing on the floor. And from that point on, I was hooked. So Daredevil has a real important part in my career. And the conversation was Daredevil centric after that. And then he showed me working on Spider-Man. There was a cover of 2 of them. However, my personal part of Daredevil was I was exasperated with the business because I was taken off X-Men to work on a dopey character, and then I was told I'd be able to get back on the X-Men again, and I couldn't get back on the X-Men again, and I was done with it. And I was very frustrated because they didn't want me. They put somebody else on the X-Men. So I said, this is it. I'm out of the business. I was ready to leave and go into advertising. And Ralph Macchio, God bless him, said, before you go, would you like to work on Daredevil? You do full pencils, anything you want, plotting. You can work with Ann Nesenti. And I knew Ann from her being an editor, brilliant lady. And I said, yeah, I would love to try it because I'm out of here. I'm out of here if not. So Ralph Macchio gave me free reign, so to speak. And I came up with some plot ideas and I worked with Ann and we had a blast. And then created some great characters. And Typhoid Mary and Blackheart, and some great run. It was a great run. Playing with Mephisto and being able to redesign Mephisto, which pissed me off that he had underwear and he had panties and he had long leggings and he had a coat. Now, I'm sorry, the devil doesn't wear that stuff. So I came up with a demonic version. And then I came up with a premise that it's called Beer with the Devil when I was younger, that a superhero walks into a bar, sits down, and, beer with God. A guy walks into a bar, sits down, and God sits next to him, and they have this conversation. And Ann Nocenti said, well, listen, we're working with Daredevil and Mephisto. How about Beer with the Devil? And we had a great run on a storyline based on that. That was when I realized I really do enjoy this and I want to stay with it. And it was all because of Daredevil. And I got a chance to do full pencils, tight pencils, and I had a hand in some of the plotting. And brilliant, and was allowing me to throw some ideas in. I thank her for that to this day.
Before I get into the weeds on Spider-Man, because that's what I really want to do. What's it like to? I can't think of any off the top of my head, but you worked on Daredevil. Your father worked on Daredevil. You worked on Spider-Man. Your father worked on Spider-Man. You worked on Fantastic Four. Your father worked on Fantastic Four. By the way, you may be the only father and son pair ever to work on crossover books with Marvel and DC.
Sure.
So what's it like to be that those guys? It's, you look at father and son pairs in sports, it's what's it like to follow in his footsteps and to take and play to play with those characters that he helped create and helped mold, and then to mold them yourself for the next generation.
Infinitely stupid. And I'll tell you why. I have a bad habit of following some geniuses. Romita Sr., I've worked on books that Jim Lee did, that John Byrne did. At some point you should just say, "Nah, I can't compete with that." I never said I was intelligent, just really good looking. That's all. That's the problem. I actually self-imposed the fear and the intimidation. Never got it from my father. The characters that I worked on, he just embraced. You want to do that? That's great. Work on Spider-Man. Working on Fantastic Four was more the chance to work with Stan when he was finally done with Fantastic Four. But it wasn't an intention to try and compete with the previous creators. I was asked to do that. And I never took it as a compliment until a couple of days ago. I don't know. I just never was smart enough to realize that I was filling a gap. Following John Byrne was probably the one that I got more comments from external sources saying, "Are you crazy? You know what Byrne did?" I also followed Paul Smith on X-Men, and he was so amazingly successful. Chris Claremont, until we got to be good friends, was a little bit, oh God, do I have to work with this guy compared to Paul or compared to John? However, if I did not raise my game, so to speak, I would have heard it worse. And I heard it before I even started. You're only getting this because of your father. Mom, you really shouldn't say that.
No, it's one of those things, is that I understand that trepidation. I certainly can understand that. I have some of that in my own life, and I understand that, trying to hold yourself to that level, and I totally get it. Like I have that in my own life.
If you don't give those goal posts, if you don't, then you're not going to get better. I got better, but I became a better creator, artist, and storyteller. The storytelling was the one that was raised higher than the art. My art is okay. My storytelling is better than my art.
It's interesting to me that you're so, story is what drives everything. Some artists talk about, well, I drew this piece and it's whatever, but it's thinking about the piece as a whole, the whole book, all of it as an essential mode of storytelling.
I'll give you a small example. I bring back Schmuggy and Bimbo working with Chaikin, who's an artist. And I think some of my best work is from guys like Frank and Chaikin. Chaikin was an artist. He's a writer. He's a brilliant writer. There are some scenes that harken back to movies I saw when I was a kid. Movies specifically called The Big Country, where there was just gigantic vista where two guys were fighting, Gregory Peck and maybe Charlton Heston. You could hear the thuds and the fighting, and it was a distant thud because they were in the background, and then we close in. That stuck with me because I remember the conversation with my father. So there's some scenes in Shmuggy and Bimbo with conversations going on, but there's the vista of Manhattan, the Lower East Side from the 70s. And the conversation will be in the panel, but there's no characters per se. And then you close in on the scene as they're sitting in a coffee shop. Those type of things to me are more challenging than people want to admit. And yet I loved every second of it because there's a couple of images that I took from old vintage photos that I look at now and I said, this was the right thing to do, but it took me much longer than a close-up of two guys in a coffee shop. That's the kind of thing that I learned, is to swallow your pride about doing pinup shots and learn to expand your arsenal. And that is one of the things. And it made me a better artist because I was able to sacrifice. And maybe somebody will tell me you're crazy. You could have sold that page with the close-up for $1 million, but you won't be able to sell a shot of the Lower East Side. That's not important. That story. When somebody comes to me and says, love that scene, love that story, and they don't say, I love that close-up of Shmuggy and Bimbo, if they don't say that, it's okay. They love the story.
So you're coming back in a couple hours to talk with Scott Hanna, who is a longtime collaborator. I think he said yesterday, 25 years you've been working together.
That's the case. See, I was only 2 years old when I started. I told you.
Yeah, it's true. And so we'll save some of the Spider-Man talk for you guys because you did a lot of issues together, including a phenomenal run with J. Michael.
Don't forget, bring up the subject about Scott and that lady from Tokyo. Don't just bring it up.
All right, I'm making a note right now.
He'll say he doesn't know anything about it. And I'm sorry, it was Bangkok, Thailand. No, I'm kidding.
Well, hey, Bob Layton made me ask Howard Chaykin about taking him to a kosher deli. So I'm all about asking the questions that make people's eyes roll back in their heads.
You could also ask me about Gene Simmons and the Kiss book. Well, he took me to a strip joint in San Diego, and here's the better part, because it was not naked strip joint; it was a truncated strip joint. It was bikinis. He didn't have any cash, Gene Simmons. Literally. And three of the dancers, because the two of us were hanging out. He doesn't drink alcohol, by the way. I had a beer in front of me, and he was sitting there, and the three dancers came over and they centered themselves in front of him, and he's sitting and he's elbowing me. He says, I don't have any cash. You got 3 20s? So Gene Simmons still owes me $60. Gene, if you're watching this, Gene, I love you and I love your music. Let me have the effing $60. Come on.
So,
and he left with the 3 girls, by the way, and I got stiffed. Excuse the expression. I got stiffed that way too.
So you come to Amazing Spider-Man issue 208, and your time on Amazing Spider-Man ran for 400 issues, like
something like that. I don't know.
208 to something like 600 plus a bunch of other stuff. What's it like to work on one character for that long?
Challenging, and it's not because you make it. The effort is there to always do something different. And first, it's difficult because there's been so many geniuses before you're on the character. But to do something different than you have done before adds to it. So if I want to try and do something different than what my father did, Steve Ditko did, do it better. That's challenge enough. But then to improve on what I had done in the past of that title while I'm working on it, that's, again, self-imposed. If I would ever work on the character again, I don't know if I would get that thought out of my head and I would be intimidated again. It's true of any character. Same thing with Superman. Holy shit, excuse me. The character's been around for 250 years. How do I do a better job than the guys that have been on it before me? That's what is sticking in my head with any character I work on, except for Kick-Ass.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure I want
with Scott. We got to talk that over with Scott. We'll mention that.
We will. For sure. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the new universe and Starbrand.
That was the character that got me off of the X-Men that I'll never forgive Jim Shooter for.
Well, and that's you know, that was the question is that new universe stuff was weird, and I know that there's some animosity there from some people, but for a lot of people of my generation, it was the first time we had seen anything from Marvel that wasn't traditional superheroes. So the only question I have about that is what was it like to kind of launch a new universe?
I don't recall what was in my mind other than I was listening to Jim Shooter because it was his baby. And he gave me a lot of stuff to use, his young youth in Pittsburgh, etc., and images of neighborhoods and so on, which was a little bit disconcerting in that I had to follow something that was not mine, so to speak, even though I was on the initial book. But I remember thinking that I have the editor-in-chief of the company staring down the back of my neck, and I'm a little bit nervous about it. That was less self-imposed than it was having the editor-in-chief follow over me. And I lost the X book because of it, and I was very, very upset about that. But then I got a chance to work on Daredevil, so everything worked out.
Yeah, so you've mentioned you're working on a book with Howard Chaykin.
Yes.
What else are you working on right now that people can be on the lookout for?
I can't tell you, but there is some things in the offing that when they happen, I won't announce them until they are announced by the parent company. However, there's 4 or 5 of creator-owned properties that I am told to turn into treatments and presentations. One of them, Schmuggy and Bimbo, is one of them. Gray Area is a possibility as well. Fortunately for us creators, there is a need for content for the former streaming services that used to have the Marvel and DC characters, and they're looking for content. And guys like me are asked to come up with content, and I'm trying to turn those into, which is why I mentioned Schmuggy and Bimbo again. After Howard has been waiting patiently for 7 to 10 years, whatever it is, since I first came up with the premise, and he made it beautiful. That I have to come up with the 3rd issue. We've got 2 issues done. The 3rd issue will get done shortly, and that will be hopefully turned into a film. I'm looking forward to it. It's genius stuff that Howard has honed. I gave him the acorn, and he turned it into the big tree.
And is that going to be an image book? Because I know Howard's stuff is all an image.
Yeah, we're hoping that Image is still interested in it. Like I said, the 3rd issue, and they'll be able to solicit if it's a 3rd issue. Then I have 2 more to do after that. But that's the kind of thing that I am going to turn my ideas into those kind of products, is a treatment and presentation, and see what becomes of them. And there's a couple more. I got 3 or 4 more, and then I would love to do that. So I can't give you the mainstream book stuff yet because I don't want to jinx it, but the creator-owned stuff I get excited about. I mentioned the names of a couple of characters before this. It's possible with Wonder Woman, possible with Batman. Who knows? But we'll see what happens. I'll let you know when it happens.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And we'll wait until the announcements come, and then we can have a big fun party and announce it and have you back on to talk about those things.
When there is an announcement, you'll want to talk. Trust me.
Absolutely. Well, I always am going to want to talk. So real quick, it's been scrolling at the bottom. It's at John Romita Jr. on Instagram. Tell people where they can find you. They can head over to Spencer's site if they want to pick up art.
Yep, that's pretty much it. I'm not a social media guy. The at John Romita Jr. was done for a business effort. And listen, I'll just give me an opinion. You can do it on Instagram. I don't even know if I'm on Facebook, but I'm not a social media kind of guy. And I wouldn't give out my email address because I already get too much stuff on it that I can't answer right now. But if you go through Spencer Beck, Spencer
Yes.
BCK at AOL, and also his studio, his art studio, as Mr. Bagley announced, I'll hear. Trust me. Anything
Those
bad, I'll
links
hear.
are
I hear a
all
lot
on
of
our
bad stuff.
website. Those links are all on our website, so you'll be able to get a hold of them. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure, boss.
We'll see you in, I'm going to count down 1, 2, 3, so like 2 hours.
2 hours.
To come
4
back
o'clock.
and hang out with Scott Hanna and really get into the weeds on some of this stuff. So.
I'll try to make sense this time as opposed to what I just did.
Oh, this was great. And, you know, my friend Rob, our friend Rob posted, he'll be on tomorrow. He's a creator. This big, long block of text basically just singing your praises. And for me, too, it's as true as it's ever been.
Somebody just did. I just saw a balloon from Rob that blinked and went away. I don't know what.
Yeah, it's a whole wall of text about.
There it is. Right, Rob. Hi, Rob. How are you?
You inspired 9-year-old Rob to turn into a comics creator, and you know he has a great book about called Punching the Clock, and a great book called Gunslingers, which is a fun premise that we'll talk about tomorrow. But same here. You're my favorite artist, and it's been an honor for me to get a chance to talk to you.
It was great talking to you. Thank you very much. And you, by the way, saying what you just said, I must compliment you. You have impeccable taste in artists. I must tell you right now.
Well, I want to thank you. We'll see you again in 2 hours, guys.
Right.
We will be back in just about a minute with Mark Mulaney and Enrique Jang from Red Stylo and Ninja Bear and Crossing. We will see you all in just about a minute. I think my camera's froze.